Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon Go video. Alright, so for today's video, we're going to be counting down the 15 legendary Pokemon that is actually worth raiding for when it comes to Pokemon Go. In case you didn't know, there are so many different legendaries that have made it into Pokemon Go, and most of them you can only obtain through 5-star raids, but a lot of them are Pokemon that you just simply do not need. I would make the argument that plenty of legendaries are just simply one and done Pokemon, meaning that you only need to catch one of them for the Pokedex entry, and you do not need to care about them anymore. But there's a lot of legendary Pokemon that are actually worth going after, and that is mainly because they're going to be really good for other raiding content, or they're going to be really good for PvP. But something you should keep in mind is that this list is subject to change because in the future, we're going to be getting more legendary Pokemon, and those Pokemon might be very significant. I mean, even notably, right now, we are about to get Necrozma dropping globally, and that is going to be a very powerful Pokemon, especially if you are able to fuse it with either Solgaleo or Lunala. So that is a Pokemon that will be a must-get Pokemon, and it will be in this list later on in the future when I redo it. But for now, let's count the 15 Pokemon that you absolutely need to raid for. Let's start this off with the Dragon and Electric type legendary Pokemon, Zekrom. This is a Pokemon that actually has a lot of significance in Pokemon Go, mainly because it's going to be a top tier electric type raid attacker, but it's also a really good Pokemon for the Master League in the Go Battle League. If you get yourself a 100% IV Zekrom or something close, it's going to prove to be very useful for your account. So I highly suggest that anytime Zekrom is in raid battles, that you actually raid for it and try to farm up as much candies as you can. Now coming in from the same generation, we also have Reshiram. Just like with Zekrom, this is going to be a top tier Pokemon when it comes to fire types, and you will want to pick it up. I also have seen Zekrom used very effectively within the Master League as well. So this is a Pokemon that's going to transform your account. It's definitely top tier, and that's saying a lot considering that there's not too many good fire types when it comes to raid damage, but Reshiram is a step above almost all of them. Honestly, when it comes to both Zekrom and Reshiram, both of them are super powerful compared to most other legendaries. Anytime they are in raid battles, I try to raid them as much as I can because on top of getting myself a 100% IV and maxing it out, I want to get myself multiple copies of these Pokemon because I do plan to use them in raid battles. So I really do think that when it comes to legendary raids, these are two that you should never ignore. They're definitely very powerful and they're going to upgrade your account no matter where you are. Alright, next up, let's talk about an Ultra Beast that often makes an appearance in 5-star raids, and that is going to be the tiny little grass-type Pokemon, Kartana. This is a very powerful Pokemon, and it's considered one of the best glass cannons in the game. On top of that, there's not too many really good grass types when it comes to raid damage. So in the small cases where you actually need a grass type, Kartana is going to be your one-stop shop. Outside of Mega Evolutions and certain Shadow Pokemon, Kartana is insanely powerful. You do not want to miss out on getting yourself a high IV of a Kartana because that Pokemon is one you are definitely going to use quite often. Take it from me, I got myself a 100% IV through a raid. I was very lucky, and I'm still looking to get myself even more Kartanas because this Pokemon absolutely shreds any raid boss that is weak against grass types. It's just that powerful, and if you do not have yourself a good one, you absolutely need to prioritize getting one because this Pokemon is just that strong. But next up, let's talk about a PvP specific Pokemon, and it's actually one that a lot of players tend to ignore, but I actually think this one is extremely valuable, and that is of course going to be the Psychic type Pokemon, Cresselia. Cresselia is a Go Battle League staple. It's a very powerful Pokemon for both the Great League and Ultra League, and it doesn't matter whether or not you actually have PvP IVs. This Pokemon is going to be incredibly useful. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to be really good for other areas of the game, like with raid battles, but it's still a very good Pokemon. If you do not have yourself really good Psychic types, this Pokemon might end up being useful. And on top of that, it has a very diverse moveset, so you could pretty much cater it to whatever needs you have for your account. And then next, another Pokemon you should always raid whenever it is in raid battles is going to be Xurkitree. This is another Ultra Beast that's going to be on this list, and much like with Kartana, it's going to be an insanely good glass cannon. But instead of grass type attacks, this is going to have electric type attacks. And just like with Kartana, aside from Mega Evolutions and certain shadows, Xurkitree is going to be top tier. You definitely want to farm it whenever it is in raid battles because it is a powerful Pokemon that's going to transform your account. Next up, let's talk about another legendary Pokemon that you absolutely need to raid for, and that is of course going to be Groudon, specifically Primal Groudon if you can do it. This is because this Pokemon is the absolute best ground type in the game, and it also has a Primal Reversion. And in case you didn't know what a Primal Reversion is, it's basically another kind of Mega Evolution that's specific to both Groudon and Kyogre. And speaking of which, that's the other Pokemon you should always raid whenever it is in raid battles, and that is going to be Kyogre. Much like with Groudon, with ground types, Kyogre is going to be one of the best when it comes to water types. And for both of these Pokemon, you will want to get their signature moves, which is Precipice Blades for Groudon and Origin Pulse for Kyogre, and if you can get that, you're gonna have yourself some top tier Pokemon when it comes to raid damage. And both of these Pokemon are also top tier when it comes to the Master League. If you can get yourself a 100% IV, you should definitely prioritize maxing it out, because that Pokemon is going to get you so many wins within the Master League, and there's very few Pokemon that actually counter them. But next up, let's talk about another PvP staple Pokemon, and this is going to be Dialga. This is a Pokemon that deals an insane amount of damage, but also resists a lot of damage as well. And that's why this is considered one of the best Master League Pokemon ever released into the game. There's a lot of Pokemon that are really good for the Master League, but none of them compared to Dialga. If you can get yourself a 100% IV Dialga and max it out, you're gonna have yourself a staple core Pokemon for the Master League for years to come. There's going to be no other Pokemon that are going to be able to surpass Dialga when it comes to the Master League. So whenever it is in raid battles, you should definitely try to get it. And then next up, let's talk about a Pokemon that actually has two separate forms, but both of those forms I'm going to count as one entry on this list. And that is of course Giratina. Now, the altered form and the origin form both have their individual uses. Giratina origin form, for example, can be a very good ghost type raid attacker, but it can also be a very good Pokemon for the Master League. And on top of that, the altered form of Giratina, that's going to be a really good Pokemon for the Ultra League and also sometimes in the Master League, but it doesn't have that many uses within raid battles. But regardless, if either of these Pokemon are in raids, you should definitely prioritize them because they are among some of the most powerful ghost types in the game right now. And then next up, let's talk about Xerneas. This is a very powerful Pokemon that is well deserving to be on this list because when it comes to raid damage, it could be a top tier fairy type raid attacker. It's only rivaled by one other Pokemon, and that is of course Mega Gardevoir, and that is why you should definitely try to farm up this Pokemon whenever you can. And then on top of that, it can be a very powerful Pokemon for the Master League, and it's often considered one of the best fairy type attackers in the game when it comes to that league. So you do not want to miss out on getting yourself a Xerneas because it is a very powerful Pokemon that's definitely going to transform your account. And then alongside Xerneas, we of course have the other Pokemon from the same generation, and that is going to be Yveltal. In fact, at the time that I'm recording this video, Yveltal is actually currently in raids, and I do suggest you go out and raid as many of these as you can. For much of the same reasons as Xerneas, Yveltal is often considered top tier. But on top of it being a top tier dark type attacker, it could also be a top tier flying type attacker. Because of that, this Pokemon has incredible versatility when it comes to raids, and it's also going to be really good for PvP as well. Now, another Pokemon which is often considered very niche for PvP, but it can still be a useful raid Pokemon, is going to be Zacian. This is a Pokemon that hasn't been in Pokemon GO in a very long time, and it often does not make an appearance. But whenever it does, you should try to raid it because when it comes to Master League Pokemon, it is often considered one of the best, and for good reason. Zacian has a very diverse moveset, and it also has a lot of power that you cannot match with any other Pokemon. And much like with a lot of other Pokemon on this list, it's going to be decent when it comes to raid damage. So yeah, you should definitely raid Zacian whenever it is in raid battles. And then next up, let's talk about a Pokemon that's going to be specifically good for PvE, and I would make the argument it's probably the most useful Pokemon when it comes to PvE, and that is going to be Terrakion. Among all the Swords of Justice Pokemon, Terrakion is going to be the absolute best one. And the reason why I say that is because it has incredible versatility when it comes to raid damage, but some players may be able to find a way to make it useful for PvP. Unfortunately, it's going to be a bit of a lower tier Pokemon when it comes to PvP, but in terms of PvE, it is the absolute best Pokemon you can have. On top of it being one of the best fighting type Pokemon, it could also be a really good rock type Pokemon, and both of those types are very much often used in all different aspects of PvE content, so you do not want to miss out on getting yourself Terrakion. It is a very powerful Pokemon, and it's going to definitely change your account for the better. Alright, and we're moving on to the last two entries on this list, and if you haven't figured it out by now, you should definitely know which two are coming. The first one is going to be, of course, Rayquaza. Rayquaza is currently the absolute best dragon type raid attacker in the game, as well as the absolute best flying type. But more recently, it has also made some appearances in the Master League, and it is often considered top tier. The reason for that is because of one move that it received, Dragon Ascent. This is by far the absolute best flying type charge attack in the game, and if you can get yourself a Rayquaza with Dragon Ascent, then you should definitely power it up, because that Pokemon is so powerful and it's incredibly versatile. So yeah, it's definitely going to be in the top tiers when it comes to what Pokemon you should raid when it comes to legendary raids. And then finally, this leads me to the last Pokemon on this list, and that is of course Mewtwo. In all the different forms of Mewtwo, this is going to be one of the most useful Pokemon in the game, and a lot of people consider it the absolute best Pokemon you can get. If you have yourself a high IV Shadow version of this Pokemon, you should definitely try to max it out and never purify it, because that Pokemon is going to be leaps and bounds the best generalist in the game. And then on top of that, in the future, it's going to be getting a Mega Evolution, which is likely going to be the most powerful Pokemon regardless of Mega Evolutions and Shadow Pokemon. And then on top of that, its regular form is also still really good. It's probably the absolute best psychic type raid attacker we are ever going to get, but also you should know that Mewtwo has incredible versatility because it has probably one of the most diverse movesets in the game as well. And then on top of that, Mewtwo also has an alternate form, which is often considered a really good Pokemon for PvP, and that is of course Armored Mewtwo. If you can end up getting yourself one of those, then congratulations, you're going to have yourself a super rare Pokemon, but also a Pokemon that's really good for PvP. Yeah, when it comes to whatever legendaries you should always raid, Mewtwo should be at the top of that list. It is an insanely good Pokemon, and you do not want to ever miss out on even collecting just candies for it, because the goal should be that you should have 6 Shadow Mewtwo's, or maybe 5 Shadow Mewtwo's that are high IVs, and then 1 regular Mewtwo that is 100% so that you could use it as a Mega Evolution. If you were to have that, you will never need any other Psychic type ever again. It is insanely strong. Like, this is probably the best Pokemon we're ever gonna have, and if you ever see it in raid battles, regardless of what form it comes in, you should always be raiding it. So yeah, that's going to be my list of 15 legendary Pokemons you should always be raiding. Now, I of course included a lot of Pokemon that are both good for PvE and PvP, but also some Pokemon that are specifically good for PvP and other Pokemon that are specifically good for raids and other PvE content. I kind of wish I did them separately now that I think about it. I mean, obviously hindsight is 2020, but I really do think this is a very solid list, because even if you do not care about PvP, chances are you have friends who do care about PvP. So you should still be rating every single one of the Pokemon that I mentioned on this list. And of course, there's also a couple of Pokemon that I did want to include on this list that you should still try to raid whenever you see them. Notably, some Shadow legendary Pokemon, because even though some Pokemon are not considered that good, or maybe they were power crept, their Shadow forms are still going to be top tier. Like, big notable example is Shadow Raikou. That is one of the best, if not the best, non-Mega Electric type currently in the game, and it certainly beats out both Xurkitree and Zekrom right now. But also keep in mind that in the future, we might get ourselves Shadow Zekrom or Shadow Xurkitree, and both of those are going to be better than Shadow Raikou. So it really is up to you. Like, if you want the absolute best, like you're a huge min-maxer, then you should obviously go for some of the best top DPS Pokemon. But if you just simply want some Pokemon that are going to be the most effective for most situations in Pokemon GO, then these are going to be the safest Pokemon for you to always raid. Yeah, with that said, that's going to be it for this video. Now, let me know your thoughts regarding everything that I talked about in this video down below in the comments. Was there a particular legendary that you argue should be part of this list? Or do you feel like this list is quite accurate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and let's have a great discussion. And thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. If you ended up enjoying it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And also don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a shout out to every single patron on my Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Conscience channel, the absolute best way you could do so is by clicking on the links in the description below, and then one of them will take you to my Patreon page. And if you become a paid Patreon member, you get a permanent spot on my in-game Pokemon Go friends list. So when it comes to in-game content like remote raids or the friendship system, if you want to play Pokemon Go with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel in a different way and still be able to interact with me, then you can do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula. I'm on the platforms that you see on screen. Make sure you go over there and give me a follow. And that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.